Good afternoon, everybody. What's up? Just having some weird audio issues. I hope everyone's doing good on Sunday. What's up, Lashid? I see that you got your DNA test. We're going to talk a little bit about those DNA tests because my opinion on those DNA tests, it usually falls in the middle. And I understand that with these updates, there's going to be changes in figures and sometimes changes in ethnicities. But as I conceptualize the next step of research, because I have to do a big research project for school, I wanted to use ancestry DNA and socially how people perceive themselves. Because I've noticed that people really freak out over these DNA updates because a lot of time these DNA updates, I don't know, they'll make someone more African or more Asian or more European. Sometimes people, well, let's just say there's some negative and positive emotions that can come with the change in ethnicity because end of the day, we still live in a racialized world. So we're going to go over some of my results, some old results that I got, some more newer results, and I'm also going to show you guys a different way of finding information about your ancestors because in my opinion, your ancestors are far more interesting than talking about DNA. But that's, of course, that's important, but I don't necessarily think that's the most important thing. But something fun happened to me today. Actually, when I logged into ancestry.com, because I don't log in all the time, there was a cousin who recently got their DNA back. And this cousin isn't even in America. This is a cousin who still is a part of the black side, but, mixed. But she lives in the UK and she had so many pictures that I've never seen before. So I was excited to see those pictures. I got to see a picture of my great grandmother. Never seen a picture of my great grandmother. I have no idea what she looked like. So it would be my father's mother's mother. So that was freaking cool. So we're gonna check out some pictures. My uncle Alonzo, we found a picture of him. It was pretty cool. So hold on one second. And I have no problem sharing pictures of people who have long since deceased. So let's see if we can get this going. Okay, cool. That's Uncle Alonzo. So this is my father's mother's uncle, to my understanding, based off of the family tree. And he is on the Puerto Rican side. So that is Georgia. Apparently, this is another one of the siblings. Did not know that. And we're going to go over this a little bit more in a second. Josefina. See, I've seen like older pictures of Josefina, but not a young picture of her. And this is great grandma. Like, now I'm going to be honest. She looks scary. Like, she looks like she beats children. Like, there was no nonsense with this lady. Grandma, why the long face? In all seriousness. So that was cool. Logging into Ancestry, I was able to find some fun stuff. That was actually kind of cool. Yeah, that's one of the good things about the Discord. We do share like family pictures and talk a little bit more openly about our family because it's YouTube can be an unsafe space. And I get it. It's the internet. No one's going to protect your feelings, but I feel as though there are certain limits that people gleefully cross. So I'm glad that my space has not become that. And it's a pretty safe space. Everyone that comes there knows they're respected, and so is the privacy. So let's get into these. I'm honest though. At least I'm consistent. She went through a lot. Probably so. Probably so. She didn't have to look mean though. Like she knew they was taking a picture. And she gave like the most stone cold look she could give in that picture. I'm like, damn. Hey, Kendra. I'm finally I'm finally available to join the live. Well, you know what? We're gonna have a different kind of a live a little bit later, but everybody may not be into that, so we'll see. What's up, Thickness? How you doing? All older people of that time had a serious face. Notice how few people smile in pics like before 1950s. Yeah, and that picture's like from like the 20s or something. So hell yeah. Still, I think we're making some excuses here. But let's get into the DNA results. So let's look at an older test. I tried to find another test, but it was I was running through some issues. Like I'm pretty organized for the most part, but life is lifing, so it can be a little challenging. So, huh? Did I delete something? Nope. Here it is. Okay, so this is on my community tab, and this is of course my sister India and myself. We some cute kids. Yes, I know, but that's not what we were looking for. We're looking for this. So this is the original test. Well, it's not the original test. This thing has been updated quite a few times. And as you can see, this was an update from like last year. So these figures are mad old. But so it was 24% English, 18% Nigerian, 16% Cameroonian, West Bantu people, 9% Mali, 8% Scottish, 27% Senegal, 6% Benin and Togo, and 3% Germanic Europe, 1% Wales, 1% France, 1% Swedish, 1% Eastern Bantu people, and 1% Spanish, which, this part was not so much this part. Matter of fact, I expect this figure to be significantly larger, the 3%. But the the Spain part didn't surprise me, but I did expect that to be larger. But typically, I range somewhere between 39% to about 44% non-Black or non-Sub-Saharan ancestry based off of these tests. I've only had, at this point, a test through Ancestry. I have downloaded my raw DNA and uploaded it other places, and I get varying degrees of new information. For me, I wasn't so much focused on the DNA results as much as I was interested in constructing a comprehensive family tree. So, of course, I had my oral history, and then I also had public records, and I was able to stitch a very good family tree. Of course, with some of the more Black ancestors, we get kind of lost around the 1700s. I have like very light references to family members, but it gets pretty cold around that for most of my Black ancestors. There's one specific ancestor, one who I get my namesake from, so to speak. He was an Atlantic Creole. He was able to sue for his rights to be his own person. So we have his information, and we can take that back to the 1600s, but he's the only one. Another reason why we were able to find more about his family is because he was also, well, not him, but one of his descendants was a Black patriot. So when America was fighting against the British, he actually fought on the side of America. So we were able to get some pretty decent records from that lineage. But overall, you can't really find this information because when you're looking at slave records, you're really looking at public sale records, and a lot of that stuff hasn't been uploaded on Ancestry. And even if it is on Ancestry, it's not clear. So when I saw 3% Germanic Europe, I was a little surprised. My grandfather completely from Germany, so I expect extremely higher percentage. But now that I'm thinking about it, I'm starting to think these tests are kind of just guessing. They're not taking into consideration human migration. They're definitely not taking into consideration things like history, like why these people fled to different parts of Europe or different parts of Africa. Like, I think these are just rough estimations of what they think your ethnicity is. So this is one of the tests. I'm going to get back to the chat before we get into the more recent one. My biggest, 50-50 biracial. Honestly, here's the thing about being a quote unquote 50-50 biracial. It's like you can look very, I wouldn't necessarily say white passing. I've only seen a few white passing biracials, very few. And I clock them. Like, not like attack, but like I'm able to know, oh yeah, you're mixed, but I ain't gonna say nothing. I see you trying to pass. But like generally they usually fall somewhere in the middle. Like And I don't necessarily think there's a one look when it comes down to mixed race people. I can usually tell when a person is not mixed. But even with that, it really depends on what do you consider not mixed. When it comes down to people who are like Southeast Asian and some type of, African ancestry, sometimes they can be very hard to even determine if those people are mixed race. So you can't always base off of phenotypes and someone's skin and someone's hair and things like that. So let's get to the more recent tests. 1 second. All right. So one of the reasons why I uploaded that documentary about the kingdom of Dahomey wasn't just because of the whole woman king situation. Of course, that was a relatively viral situation, but I really wanted people to understand that it's important for us to know how our ancestors got here. I think a lot of times when people think of the institution of slavery and the transatlantic slave voyage, they think, oh, it's just some Africans from somewhere in Africa. I'm like, well, yeah, but try to find out where. And one of the fun things that I did with Ancestry is I was able to find an African cousin. And you can do that by just filtering certain DNA matches. And then once you do a filtering process, you can also filter it by location. So chances are, if you have a family member who is monoracially black, but they live in the UK or, sometimes still in Africa, chances are you are connected by some African ancestor. You may not necessarily be able to isolate specifically what that ancestor is or who that ancestor was, but you'll have an idea of where to start. And I feel like that gives you some level of a connection, especially since the records were not the best. I believe the more can be paid for ancient DNA matches. I don't know much about the ancient DNA matches, but what I'm thinking that I'm going to do, especially after this most recent test, I think I'm going to I think it's probably a good idea to take multiple tests. I think I'm going to take 23andMe and another test. And I'm going to take different tests from different accounts because I want to know if they are just kind of giving us bullshit results. And the only way that we can do that is by taking a bunch of different tests. And if they are bullshit results, that could be a whole different conversation. Because if I take a test from Ancestry, then I take another test from Ancestry, but I use a different account and I'm getting different results, I mean, then there's a question of, are these results even worth it? I've heard some weird stuff where twins are taking Ancestry tests and they're getting different results. So, I mean, I feel like these tests are cool to give a baseline, but I really don't think these are tests that we should just put all this focus in. So, see, I'm getting distracted. Hold on 1 second. All right, let me show this first. So when you do an Ancestry, it gives you a map of pretty much where your DNA is. And I got some Native American ancestry. So on the other side, there is the American continent, and they select that as well. But I was more focused on this part. I mean, this part I know about, but this part is where the mystery comes in. Because apparently I had some family members who could have been kidnapped by the Dahomey, which more than likely they were based off of the region where I came from. So this part has always fascinated me more because there's no records. No one wrote anything down. At least they didn't use names. This, I have plenty of records to find stuff. So stop sharing. Let's get into some DNA results. I did look into some consultants. And honestly, once I do these tests, I may really look into hiring professionals, especially to go over my data to make sure, it's accurate. But honestly, if I take multiple tests and I get multiple answers, we're going to have a problem. All right, here we go. So here are the most recent results. So as you can see, they're different significantly. So Cameroonian 25%, Wales 15%, England and Northwestern Europe, which encompasses pieces of Germany apparently, 12%, Ivory Coast and Ghana 9%, Scottish 9%, Senegal 6%, Benin Togo 6%, Sweden/Denmark 6%, Mali 5%, Nigeria 3%. Now, apparently they split Nigeria up a little bit. So there's an East Central. Don't know much of the difference between the two. Maybe someone can enlighten me in the chat. And Southern Bantu people, both of those are 1%. But there's more. I'm trying to like share stuff without necessarily sharing all my family's names and stuff. It's one thing to have your name out there. It's a completely different thing when you got your cousin and all that other stuff out there. And the rest of it, okay, see, there's Nigeria is actually split in like 3 spots. No, just 2 spots. I'm sorry. Because it's, again, Nigeria, East Central, 1%, Southern Bantu people, 1%, Eastern Bantu people, 1%, and 1% Indigenous North American. I've read somewhere when it comes down to Native American DNA, they don't have enough of it, and they don't do a very good job of identifying where it is. So when I look at these DNA tests, I'm like, how much stock are we going to put in them? I mean, they give you an idea of where to start, and they're really good with the DNA matches. In my opinion, the DNA matches are far more relevant than any of the general, oh, you're from this part of Asia, or you're from this part of Europe, you're from this part of Africa. Unless you're using it to tell your story and figure out more about where you're from or who you are, then they're not that important. Here's another thing that Ancestry does real weird. Like, let me show you guys something. So there's these communities that your DNA is associated with. My DNA is associated with early Virginia African Americans, right? So like the first slaves that were brought to the United States, which makes sense. Like I said, we're about the story of my ancestor. Like we were one of the first ones brought here. But that I'm only in like 2 communities, right? But my parents are in multiple communities. Let me show you the communities my parents are in. And I had to copy it to a Word document because I didn't want to, like I said, share too much. Here it is. So my paternal DNA communities, Southern Midwestern settlers, this is usually for white people, which makes sense. Same with Georgia and Florida settlers, usually making reference to white people. The Carolinas, Maryland, Virginia, African Americans. This doesn't give me a specific time period, but typically the slaves that were in this part of America, as opposed to the ones that were in the deeper parts of the South, like Mississippi, Georgia, places like that. So it's interesting. Some of my father's white DNA, even though it was in the deep South, a lot of the slave, DNA was in the upper South and the Shenandoah Valley area. And West Virginia, like, used to just be Virginia before the Civil War. So, like, that's all still Virginia. So the maternal line is a little bit more interesting. And bear in mind, my father was the one who's biracial. My mother, I guess, would be called MGM. When we pulled her DNA, she's in like the 36, high 30s area. And some of you have seen pictures of my mom. So she has Louisiana Creole and African Americans. The Carolinas, Maryland, Virginia, African Americans, very similar to my father, which is interesting. Mid-Atlantic coast African Americans. So this is also, I'm thinking this is like still the Carolinas, right? Somebody give me some clarification in the chat. Wouldn't that still be considered the Carolinas? and early Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, East Texas settlers. Makes sense because my mother, a lot of her ancestry, especially when it comes down to her white ancestry, is in Mississippi, Alabama, Texas, all of that part of the South when we look at her ancestry. So let's go ahead and stop sharing this. So maybe can you guys help me out with some of these communities? Like the Mid-Atlantic, wouldn't that be considered like the Carolinas? I see. A lot of my relatives are from that state. Which state specifically? Virginia? But yeah, so here's the thing when it comes down to finding ancestors, because ancestors, in my opinion, are far more interesting than DNA results, especially if you don't know much about your family history. If you have grandparents, as long as you have the grandparents' name, you can pretty much build off from that. Because 9 times out of 10, somebody completed a census with your grandparents on it, either when they were children or when they were adults. So as long as you got a grandparent or a name of a grandparent, you're usually in good business. Now, let's just say you don't have any information about anybody. You have no idea who your family is. When you take a DNA test, it does filter the matches by distance. If they're distantly related to you, they'll show you how distant. More than likely, is it a second cousin, third cousin? But if a person is pretty close to you, maybe they can answer some questions about your family that you had no idea about. A lot of people who are adopted, who have no idea where to start, and they use Ancestry, that's a good way to get things started. You never know who knows the family history or the family story of how you ended up in the system. Really now. But Mid-Atlantic, though, and we also got to think historically. When you think, for example, when you thought of the West, when you think of the West, you think of now California, maybe Arizona at the most, but you're usually thinking, Portland, Washington. You're thinking the West. But when they said the West back in, pre-Civil War, they're thinking of Ohio, Michigan, So when they say Mid-Atlantic, what do they mean? Mid-Atlantic region. What is that? Wait a minute. Okay, so technically, what's considered the Mid-Atlantic is New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Virginia, Maryland, Delaware. All of those are considered Mid-Atlantic. So we're like those like free people of color or something. Because let me read the community again. Mid-Atlantic Coast African Americans. I imagine they must have been free people of color, which makes sense. Okay. Okay. So it's interesting. Like this little information about the DNA communities, I also find that pretty interesting because it lets you know an idea of the region, and then you can kind of put the pieces together. But you got to know a little bit about history, especially if we're talking American history. American history is what, about 300, 400 years old. It's pretty easy to sum up where your family came and how they got here for the most part. So I'm thinking next year, like I said, I'm going to take a couple of different tests. I'm going to take some tests with another test with Ancestry and definitely one with 23andMe. And not only just compare and contrast the results, but I'm also going to use the raw data and upload them in different places to see how different they are. Maybe they're not different at all, which would be great. I would prefer that there's no changes and everything is the same than seeing a huge difference, because it means these tests are just a waste of everybody's money. So with that being said, thank you guys for joining me on this little DNA journey. We're going to do more probably in the coming year, and definitely check out my stream later with Abby NYC We're going to be talking about Raising Canaan, a really fun show, a show that I just got her on. I just exposed her to the show last week, and she's like, "Oh my God, I love the show." So I look forward to seeing you guys later tonight.